Hey guys, it's Zach with Splitwood Studio, and today I am going to be building or rebuilding my birch epoxy river table. And the reason for that being that my mom saw the first one and she really liked it, but just thought that it was a little bit too thin. And my dad always wanted to be one of my first commission pieces, and so he realized that this was the perfect time, a great Mother's Day gift, and he would get to buy a commission piece from me. So we went up to Utah Tree Cycle, which is the local slab shop that I love going to because they have a vacuum kiln, which ensures that there won't be very many, if any, issues with like trapped moisture in the slabs. And if there are any bugs, the heat will kill them. And these slabs had a lot of bug holes, which I think are a good thing. I think they really add to the aesthetics, especially when you're doing an epoxy river pour. The epoxy is able to get into those bug holes and it just looks really cool. But it did take a long time to go through and clean out all of these bug holes. A fun little fact, the termite poop that you see me cleaning out with my dental tools right here is actually called frass. And the easiest way that I've found to clean out frass is actually with an air compressor. A lot of woodworkers use dental picks like this, and there's nothing wrong with that, they do work great. However, they just take a lot of time. So if you're able to get an air compressor and a really narrow tipped air nozzle, then I feel like that works a lot faster and a lot better. It cleans out most of the loose frass. You still do need to use the dental picks to get down deep. And the biggest reason that I'm not doing this method right now is because I can't find my really narrow nozzled air compressor tip. So I'm just using a fairly normal sized one and the dental picks. After spending several hours cleaning up all of the edges from the different bug holes, I moved on to prepping it for the epoxy pour. One of the biggest things that my dad and mom wanted from this table was to be thicker than the first version. And the first version was about 3/4 of an inch. That's mostly because I put it on my router sled too early. I had a different idea that I was going to run with that wasn't going to have epoxy, but rather stitches going throughout the middle. And after I got it through the router sled and everything was level, my wife and I decided that it would be better to change it and do an epoxy pour. But that meant that after the epoxy was poured, I would have to take off just a little bit more. And then that and the issue with my router sled dropping down about 1/4 of an inch just really compounded to make it so that I couldn't get as thick as I would have wanted. And so this time, instead of putting it on the router sled to begin with, I just threw it right into the epoxy mold and began pouring. And something else that I learned from the last time is to really calculate how much you need and then under prepare. You can always mix more epoxy and mix it in, but you can't unmix epoxy. And so this time I actually had to come back about 4 times because I really didn't want to waste any epoxy, as epoxy's not cheap. That combined with how soft this wood was and how much of the epoxy actually seeped into the wood really made it so I had to come back time and time again to add more and more. One thing that I love about my setup is my epoxy pouring tent. It's actually called a grow tent. And I love that because it allows me to cure deep pour epoxy a lot faster if I want to. For example, this table took about 2 days to cure, whereas in my typical shop temperature, it would have taken about a week and a half to 2 weeks. It also has the added benefit of creating a dust-free zone. There are cheaper ways that you can go about things like this though. For example, you could get a heated blanket and put that underneath, and then maybe just put a piece of melamine over the top, and that would create a pretty dust-free zone and also heat it up so that it cures faster. You just have to be careful that it doesn't get too hot or else it will flash cure, and many times when it flash cures, the epoxy ends up cracking, and that's just not fun for anyone. Another thing to keep in mind is that the faster the epoxy cures, the more air bubbles you're going to have. And so if you do have time to let it sit for 2 weeks or so before you pull it out of the mold, then that would be even better. You're going to have a lot less air bubbles. This was a little bit of a rushed project, and so I had to speed it up by heating it up more. But then on the back end, I have more micro bubbles that I have to go through and fill. Another tip that I'd give, and most other epoxy woodworkers also know this, is to keep your project a couple inches oversized and don't trim it down until you've gotten as far as you can, essentially. This helps in a lot of different ways, but one of the main ones that I found is that when I started and I was cutting everything to size before and then I did the epoxy pour, I always ended up having to trim off a little bit on the ends, and so I was a little bit short on the dimensions that I was shooting for. But if I always cut an inch or two extra, then I have plenty to work with. Now this table isn't going to see a lot of use, honestly. It's more of a decor table, but there were some spots that were kind of spongy. And so right near the beginning, I ordered some penetrating epoxy from Total Boat, and that will allow me to get it in there into some of those spongy spots and pretty much make them just as solid as the rest of the wood. Now I've never done this before, but it was a pretty simple process. You just mix it up. It's a 2-to-1 ratio. Once it's mixed, you can paint it on there, you can try and submerge it. Since my board was pretty much right where I wanted it to be size-wise, I decided to just brush it on there so that it would hopefully seep in, and I was truly shocked at how much seeped into it. This small table took about 3 cups of epoxy, and a little bit of that did stay on the surface, but I would say at least 2 cups went down into the wood. And once again, the grow tent came in very handy. It cut what was supposed to be a 3-day cure time down to 1 day. And then it was on to pretty much the final steps in getting it ready to be sold. And that was sanding. I did have a lot of really heavy sanding to go through because of that epoxy, so I pulled out the belt sander to get rid of most of it, and then moved on to using my Festool. And this has been one of my favorite purchases that I've made in a very long time, honestly, just because of how much better it makes one of the least liked parts of woodworking I actually look forward to now. And that probably won't always be the case, but for the next little while I think it will be. I love using this sander. Now I don't think that the appearance of the DeWalt sander or any other sander really versus the Festool has changed at all. It's more just the process has changed for me. I wanted to do something a little bit different with the profile on this table. The first one didn't have enough thickness to really do much other than an 1/8 inch roundover, and so I matched that on the top, but on the bottom I wanted to do something different, and that was about a 30-degree chamfer. The only problem was that I didn't actually have a 30-degree chamfer with a bearing, and so I had to create pretty much a straight edge for my router to run up against, and I measured everything out, put that at the right distance, and it worked out pretty good with the little 60-degree V-bit. Once I got everything sanded up to 150, I went ahead and did the water pop, and I seriously love doing water pops because you get to see all the beautiful grain. And these 2 slabs specifically had a lot of spalting. And I'm no professional, but from what I've understood, spalting is essentially when fungus gets into the tree and starts rotting it. And then when you put it in the kiln, it kills that fungus, and so it does become stable. Now these slabs did get a little bit too far into that spalting stage, and that's why there was so much decay that I needed to fill in with the epoxy, but it was worth it for how beautiful they are. And something that you might have noticed is that unlike last time, I haven't actually put any threaded inserts into this table. And that was mostly because me and my dad were keeping this a surprise from my mom, but we didn't know what legs she would want to go with, if she'd want to do the same ones as the previous table or a new design. And so I decided that those were something that I could add in later. After sanding up to 180, I moved on to finishing. And for that, I'm going to use Rubio Monocoat. This has been a pretty well-known woodworking finish, and I think that that's for good reason. It is really easy to use and get a nearly perfect finish. Now, last time I did this table, I kept track of how much finish I used, and so I just mixed up that same amount for this table, but it soaked up a lot more, which really surprised me because of using the penetrating epoxy. I thought it would get in there and make it so that the Rubio couldn't, essentially. But I think that there was just so much soft wood that it still found a way to get in there. But this had me concerned that there would still be a couple more soft spots that hadn't been filled with the epoxy. So I went around with my fingernail just pressing on every spot that I could, essentially, to make sure that it wouldn't make a gouge into the wood. And I'm happy to confirm that the wood was very solid all throughout. I couldn't find any spots that worried me. And now that I'm nearly done with this table, I'll throw in a couple pictures to remind you about the first one, or if you haven't seen it, to show you it. But what do you guys think? Do you think that I was able to make it look better, especially with the thickness? Which one would you personally take? And if you guys liked the video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. It will really help my channel to be able to grow to what I hope it will be one day.